Thank you, Acting Deputy Speaker. I'd like to put on Hansard that maybe the member for Bradfield should read the good member for Menzies' contribution. That was a fine contribution in this House. In my list of thanks, I'd like to thank the member for Jagga for moving a motion in this place on such an important issue, not just to the people of Australia, but to the people in my electorate of Spence. During this sad, sorry saga, better known as Robodebt, we had roughly over 6,300 victims in my electorate of Spence. That number multiplied further by the families affected by vicariously living their ordeal at the hands of the previous government. Not to indicate that this is by any means over, I'd like to thank the Minister for Government Services and the Attorney-General for their unwavering efforts to disinfect this dark chapter of Australia's history with a dose of sunlight. Though not in the same manner as I have above, I'd like to thank the former members for Aston, Fadden and Pearce, and despite this not being the only point of controversy that brought about their ends of their political careers, to an extent they would have invariably seen the writing on the walls at some point throughout the Robodebt timeline, no matter how late in, and they realised that their actions were not commensurate with being a member of this place, let alone a minister. This is not an issue that is a partisan attack, despite what some in the opposition and some across elements of the media would have you think. This is not Liberal versus Labor. In the time I have known the member for Aston and member for Pearce, I have a strong feeling that they would do so much better than their predecessors, and for that matter, the newly elected member for Fadden. I would like to hope the exact same for him as well. Then there is the member for Cook. For some out in the community, it is the fact that they have a family member who is no longer with us, as a constant and eternal reminder of Robodebt, something that will haunt them forever, something that nobody can take back and rectify. For others, seeing the member for Cook still sitting in this place feels like nothing more than a slap in the face. In this 47th Parliament, the member for Cook has delivered 5 speeches, with 3 of which being nothing more than him defending himself against any number of scandals during his time as Minister and indeed as Prime Minister. I note that the Leader of the Opposition called a Royal Commission into Robodebt nothing more than a political witch hunt, which is what one must do when you are harbouring a coven within your party room. It is one of the most systematic failures of government that has been coupled with the most egregious examples of those who have been found wanting by the final report to have made every attempt to shirk any responsibility for the part they played whilst holding some of the highest offices in this land. Despite the lack of responsibility shown from the ministers that were at the coalface of this scheme, I would like to thank the bravery of victims of Robodebt, families of Robodebt victims, advocates and whistleblowers for coming forward, either to the Royal Commission itself or in the years leading up to this reckoning, to all channels leading up from the electorate offices of our local members of Parliament. For that is sometimes the best way to get the word up the food chain that something is seriously wrong. Seriously wrong is an absolute understatement. Despite that, those opposite, when in government all the way to now, did everything they could to downplay this. And I'm not talking about the subjective things like undermining the role of the Royal Commission itself. I'm talking about the mistruths of using lines like Robodebt was something used by governments on all sides, or that it was in fact set up by the Minister for Government Services himself when in government. Completely misleading all and sundry, or at least attempting to. The fact that they knowingly tweaked a system that was used to help identify debts to then be checked by staff members, but instead they had a scheme that took the human element out of it entirely. The computer punched out a debt notice. It was sent out to the unknowing victim of a Robodebt, and the onus was placed on them to prove their innocence. Some of these alleged debts could have been from years ago, meaning they were stuck having to find old payslips and bank statements, often at a cost to themselves, just to try and get this debt to go away. The moral of this story is, when you take the human element out of government, bad things can happen. We can't forget that lesson lightly, especially when we know that these acts and omissions by many senior figures in government and the public service at the time had a human cost attached to it. This is something that nobody should ever forget. Thank the House.